The wind howled through the narrow alley behind the bus station, carrying with it the bitter cold of another merciless night in Briar Glen. Aria Linden pressed her back against the brick wall, pulling her threadbare jacket tighter around her body as she cradled her baby brother Samuel against her chest. The cardboard boxes she had arranged as a makeshift shelter did little to block the freezing gusts that seemed determined to find every exposed inch of skin. Samuel whimpered, his tiny fists curling against Aria's collarbone. She could feel his body trembling, and panic fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. He was too cold. They were both too cold. But she had nothing left to give him except the warmth of her own body, and the only thing that had ever truly been hers, her voice. "Hush now, sweet Samuel," Aria whispered, beginning to hum a melody that lived somewhere deep in her memory, a place where warmth and safety still existed. The tune was soft and lilting, rising and falling like waves on a distant shore she could barely remember. Her mother's lullaby, the one Victoria Linden had sung to her every night before the world fell apart. Samuel's crying quieted to soft hiccups, then to nothing at all. His breathing evened out, and Aria felt the tension in his small body gradually release. She continued humming, letting the music wrap around them both like an invisible blanket, warmer than anything material she could provide. Above them, mounted on the station wall, an old radio crackled to life as the night shift worker inside turned it on. Aria barely registered it at first, her focus entirely on keeping Samuel calm and warm. But then words cut through the static, crisp and clear, despite the radio's age. "This is KBGN, Briar Glen's #1 station for news and entertainment. Tomorrow marks the beginning of the Rising Voice Nationals, the country's premier singing showcase for undiscovered talent. With a grand prize of $50,000 and a recording contract with Meridian Records, this could be someone's ticket to a brand new life." Aria's humming stopped abruptly. $50,000. The words echoed in her mind, bouncing off the walls of her exhausted thoughts. $50,000 could mean food, medicine, a real place to sleep. It could mean safety for Samuel, a chance at the life he deserved instead of this endless nightmare of cold nights and empty stomachs. The competition begins tomorrow at the Briar Glen Performance Hall, with preliminary auditions starting at 9 a.m. This year's panel includes the legendary Vivienne Frost, industry veteran Marcus Chen, and special guest judge Jackson Vale, fresh off his Grammy win for Album of the Year. Jackson Vale, even Aria, living on the streets for the past 6 months, had heard that name. His songs played from car radios and shop windows, his face smiled from magazine covers, visible through convenience store windows. He was everything that represented success, stability, and a world so far removed from her reality that it might as well exist on another planet. Samuel stirred in her arms, making the small mewling sounds that meant he would be hungry soon. Aria looked down at him, at his perfect little face barely visible in the dim light filtering from the street lamp half a block away. He was only 1 year old. He deserved so much more than this. More than hiding behind bus stations, more than hunger, more than fear. He deserved a home. "I can do this," Aria whispered to him, though he had fallen back asleep. "I can sing. Mama always said I could sing. I'll go to that audition and I'll win, and then everything will be different. I promise, Samuel. I promise I'll keep us safe." The determination in her voice surprised even herself. It had been so long since she had felt anything other than the immediate, desperate need to survive one more day. But now, listening to that radio announcement fade back into static and country music, something inside her shifted. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about actually living, about giving Samuel a future instead of just a present filled with suffering. Aria adjusted Samuel against her shoulder and carefully stood up. her legs stiff from sitting in the cold. She gathered their few belongings, a dirty blanket Mara from the soup kitchen had given her last week, a half-empty bottle of water, the plastic bag containing Samuel's diapers, and the last jar of baby food she had been rationing for 3 days. Everything they owned in the world fit in a single grocery bag. "Tomorrow," she whispered, looking at the distant lights of downtown Briar Glen where the performance hall stood like a beacon. "Tomorrow we start over." She settled back down against the wall, arranging Samuel more comfortably in her arms, and began humming again. This time, though, the melody carried something it hadn't contained in months. Hope. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy educational stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. The morning came too quickly and not quickly enough. Aria had barely slept, her mind racing with plans and possibilities, and the nagging voice of doubt that whispered all the reasons why this wouldn't work. But as the first rays of sunlight crept into the alley, warming the cold air by a few precious degrees, she pushed those doubts aside and focused on what needed to happen. She used the last of their water to clean Samuel's face and hands, then did her best with her own appearance. Her dark hair was tangled and dirty, her clothes wrinkled and stained. But there was nothing she could do about that now. She would have to hope that her voice would speak louder than her appearance. The walk to the performance hall took nearly an hour, with Aria stopping several times to rest and feed Samuel the last of the baby food. By the time they arrived, the grand building with its marble columns and glass doors seemed to mock her with its elegance. People streamed in and out, most of them dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Aria had seen in her entire life. They carried professional equipment, portfolio cases, and the kind of confidence that came from having backup plans and safety nets. Aria had neither. She had only her voice and the desperate hope that it would be enough. She approached the main entrance where a tall man in a crisp suit stood with a clipboard, checking names against a list. His badge identified him as Oliver Crane, event coordinator. His expression was one of practiced patience mixed with subtle disdain for anything that threatened to disrupt his carefully planned schedule. "Name?" he asked without looking up as Aria approached. "Aria Linden," she said, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. Oliver's pen hovered over his clipboard. Then he looked up. His eyes traveled from her face down to Samuel in her arms, then back up to her tangled hair and dirty clothes. His expression shifted from practiced patience to outright dismissal. "Is your parent or guardian here to sign you in?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "I don't have one," Aria admitted, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "But I can sing. I can really sing. And I need to audition." Oliver's laugh was short and humorless. "I'm sure you can, sweetheart, but this is a professional competition with very strict rules. You need to be registered, which requires a parent or legal guardian's signature. You need to be at least 10 years old, and you need—" He gestured vaguely at her and Samuel. "Well, you need to have your situation sorted out before you can think about auditioning." "Please," Aria said, hating the pleading note in her voice but unable to suppress it. "I came all this way. Just let me try. You don't have to let me in the actual competition. Just let someone hear me sing. Please." "I'm sorry, but rules are rules," Oliver said, already turning his attention to the next person in line, a woman in a sequined dress who breezed past Aria without a second glance. "You need to leave before security has to escort you out." Aria stood frozen for a moment, feeling the familiar weight of defeat settling over her shoulders. This was it. Her one chance, and she was being turned away before she could even open her mouth. Samuel began to fuss, sensing her distress, and she automatically started swaying and humming to calm him. The melody that came from her throat was instinctive, born from months of using her voice as the only tool she had to soothe her brother. She sang softly, barely above a whisper, but the notes were pure and clear, carrying an emotion that came from a place deeper than technique or training. It was the sound of love and loss and desperate hope all woven together into something hauntingly beautiful. People nearby stopped to listen. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Even Oliver looked up from his clipboard, his expression shifting from dismissal to something closer to surprise. "Who's singing?" The voice came from behind Aria, and she turned to see a man approaching from the parking area. He was younger than she expected, maybe in his early 30s, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. His clothes were expensive but casual, and there was an ease in his movements that spoke of someone comfortable in his own skin. Aria recognized him immediately from the posters plastered around the venue. Jackson Vale. "Just a girl trying to get in without proper registration," Oliver said quickly, stepping forward as if to block Jackson's view of Aria. "I'm handling it." "That was you singing just now?" Jackson asked, looking directly at Aria and ignoring Oliver completely. Aria nodded, suddenly unable to find her voice. Samuel chose that moment to grab a handful of her hair and pull, breaking the spell. She gently disentangled his fingers, while Jackson watched with an expression she couldn't quite read. "How old are you?" Jackson asked. 8, Aria answered honestly. "And this is your brother?" "Yes." "Samuel. He's 1. Where are your parents?" The question hit like a physical blow, but Aria had learned to keep her face neutral when talking about her parents. "They're dead. Car accident last year." Jackson's expression softened with what looked like genuine sympathy. He glanced at Oliver, then back at Aria, then seemed to make a decision. "Oliver, I'll take responsibility for her audition. List me as her temporary guardian for today's purposes." "Mr. Vale, I don't think that's—" Oliver began, but Jackson cut him off with a raised hand. "I'm one of the judges, which means I have some say in who auditions, correct?" "Technically, yes, but—" "Then it's settled. Get her registered." Oliver's face flushed with frustration, but he couldn't argue with the judge's authority. "Fine, but Miss Frost is not going to be happy about this." "Let me worry about Vivian," Jackson said. He turned back to Aria, his expression serious. "Can you really sing, or was that just something you do for your brother?" "I can sing," Aria said, and this time her voice was steady. "My mother taught me. She was a real singer before everything." "What's your name?" "Aria Linden." Jackson smiled slightly. "Well, Aria Linden, let's see if we can make something happen here. But I need to be honest with you. This isn't going to be easy. Even with me vouching for you, there are going to be people who question whether you should be here. Are you prepared for that?" Aria looked down at Samuel, who had finally calmed and was now playing with the zipper on her jacket, oblivious to the conversation happening around him. She thought about the cold nights behind the bus station, the hungry days, the constant fear of being caught and separated by social services. She thought about her mother's voice teaching her harmonies in a kitchen that no longer existed, her father's hands on piano keys that had been sold or donated or destroyed in the accident. "I'm prepared," she said, meeting Jackson's eyes with a determination that surprised even herself. "Whatever it takes." The interior of the Briar Glen Performance Hall was even more intimidating than the exterior. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, their light reflecting off polished marble floors that squeaked under Aria's worn sneakers. Everywhere she looked, there were people who belonged here. Contestants with vocal coaches hovering nearby, parents adjusting their children's expensive performance outfits, photographers capturing behind-the-scenes moments for social media accounts Aria couldn't even imagine having access to. She felt Oliver's disapproving glare boring into her back as Jackson led her through the main corridor toward the registration area. Samuel had grown heavier in her arms, his small body relaxing into sleep after the morning's excitement, and Aria's shoulders ached from carrying him for so long. But she didn't dare ask for a break. She was here by the grace of Jackson Vale's intervention, and she couldn't afford to seem like more trouble than she was worth. "Mr. Vale," a voice called out, sharp and precise as a knife blade. "A word, please." Aria turned to see a woman approaching from one of the side hallways. She was striking in a way that had nothing to do with conventional beauty and everything to do with presence. Her silver hair was pulled back in an immaculate twist, her black pantsuit was clearly designer, and her posture suggested someone who had never doubted her right to take up space in any room she entered. Vivienne Frost. Even without the introduction, Aria would have known her from the posters and the radio descriptions. This was the judge everyone feared, the one who could destroy dreams with a single cutting comment. "Vivienne," Jackson said, his tone carefully neutral. "I was just getting our newest auditioner registered." Vivienne's ice blue eyes swept over Aria with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. The dirty clothes, the sleeping baby, the exhaustion written in every line of Aria's young face. Her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Oliver informed me of your creative interpretation of our registration requirements," Vivienne said, each word precisely enunciated. "I appreciate your passion for discovering talent, Jackson, but this is highly irregular. We have protocols for a reason." "She has talent," Jackson said simply. "Real talent, the kind we created this show to find. She's 8 years old with an infant in her arms and no visible means of support or supervision," Vivienne countered. "This isn't a charity case audition. This is a professional competition with legal requirements and ethical standards. What happens if she's injured? If something happens to the baby? Who takes responsibility?" "I will," Jackson said firmly. "For today I'm her guardian. Whatever happens, it's on me." "How noble," Vivienne said, her tone making it clear she found nothing noble about it at all. "And tomorrow, next week, when the cameras start rolling and every news outlet in the country wants to know why we let a homeless child compete without proper safeguards in place." The word homeless hung in the air like an accusation. Aria felt her cheeks burn with shame, but she forced herself to stand straighter, to meet Vivienne's gaze without flinching. Yes, she was homeless. Yes. She was 8 years old and responsible for a baby who should have been someone else's responsibility. But none of that changed the fact that she could sing, that she had something worth hearing. If only someone would give her the chance. "I can take care of my brother," Aria said, her voice quiet but steady. "I've been doing it for 6 months. And I can sing. If you just let me audition, I'll prove it." Vivienne's gaze shifted to Aria, really seeing her for the first time. Something flickered in those ice-blue eyes, surprise perhaps at being addressed directly, or maybe just reassessment of her initial judgment. When she spoke again, her tone was marginally less hostile. 6 months is a long time for someone your age to be on their own," Vivienne said. "Where were you before that?" "With my parents," Aria answered. "Until they died. Then foster care, but they were going to split me and Samuel up, send him to a different family. So we left." "You ran away from foster care?" Vivienne's eyebrows rose. "Do you understand the magnitude of what you're admitting? There are agencies looking for you, people whose job it is to return you to proper supervision." "I know," Aria said. Fear prickled along her spine, but she couldn't back down now. "But Samuel needs me. I'm all he has, and this competition, the prize money, it could change everything. We could have a real home. We could be safe." "That's an enormous burden to place on a singing competition," Vivienne said, but some of the sharpness had left her voice. Life rarely works out the way we hope, especially for children with nowhere to fall if things go wrong. I'm already at the bottom, Aria replied. There's nowhere left to fall. But maybe, just maybe, there's a way up. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken judgments and decisions. Jackson stood to the side, watching the exchange with an expression that suggested he was seeing something he hadn't expected in either of them. Finally, Vivienne let out a long breath that might have been a sigh. "One audition," she said, holding up a single finger for emphasis. "A preliminary audition, private, with just the 3 senior judges present. No cameras, no audience, no promises. If, and this is a significant if, you demonstrate genuine talent, we'll discuss next steps. But if you're wasting our time, if this is just a desperate ploy for sympathy, I will personally ensure you're connected with proper social services. Is that understood?" It wasn't what Aria had hoped for, but it was more than she'd had 5 minutes ago. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." "And the baby stays backstage with supervision," Vivienne continued. "Oliver, find someone from staff to watch him during the audition, someone qualified." "I'll find someone," a new voice said, and Aria turned to see a woman emerging from the wardrobe area. She was perhaps in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and laugh lines that suggested a life spent smiling. Her badge identified her as Mara Lee, wardrobe assistant. "I've raised 3 kids of my own. I can handle one sweet baby for a few minutes." Aria's first instinct was to refuse, to insist that Samuel stayed with her because that's what she'd been doing for months, never letting him out of her sight, never trusting anyone else with his care. But Mara's expression was so genuinely warm, so maternal in a way that made Aria's chest ache with longing for her own mother, that she found herself nodding. "Just for the audition," Aria said, her arms tightening around Samuel protectively. "And if he cries—" "I'll bring him right to you," Mara promised. "Come on, sweetie, let's get you both sorted out. When's the last time this little one had a proper meal?" The question was casual, but Aria felt the weight of judgment behind it. When was the last time Samuel had eaten properly? When was the last time she had? The baby food was gone, and she'd been planning to beg for samples at the grocery store later if this audition thing didn't pan out. "This morning," Aria lied, because the truth was too complicated and too shameful to explain in a hallway full of strangers. Mara's expression suggested she knew it was a lie, but she didn't call Aria out on it. Instead, she simply held out her arms in invitation. "May I?" Aria hesitated, then carefully transferred Samuel into Mara's waiting arms. He stirred slightly but didn't wake, his small hand curling against Mara's shoulder in unconscious trust. The sight of someone else holding her brother sent a spike of anxiety through Aria's chest, but she forced herself to take a step back, to let go. "We'll be in the wardrobe room," Mara said gently. "Right down that hall, 3rd door on the left. You come get him the moment you're done, okay?" "Okay," Aria whispered, watching as Mara carried Samuel away. She felt suddenly lighter without his weight in her arms, and paradoxically more vulnerable, as if she'd just handed over the only armor she possessed against the world. "The preliminary audition will be in Conference Room B," Vivienne said, all business now that the logistical issues were resolved. "That gives you 30 minutes to prepare. I suggest you use that time to decide what you're going to sing, and to make yourself presentable." She swept away without waiting for a response, her heels clicking authoritatively on the marble floor. Jackson remained, studying Aria with an expression that combined curiosity and concern. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Once you walk into that room and sing for Vivienne and Marcus, there's no going back. They'll know your story, and stories like yours have a way of spreading. You might attract attention you don't want." "I don't want attention," Aria said. "I want the prize money. I want Samuel to have food and a bed, and a chance at a normal life. If I have to get attention to make that happen, then that's what I'll do." Jackson nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Do you know what you're going to sing?" Aria thought about the lullabies her mother had taught her, the songs that had filled their home before everything fell apart. There was one in particular, one her mother had written herself for Aria's 5th birthday. Aria Linden had never been famous, had never recorded an album or performed on a big stage, but she'd had a voice like honey and starlight, and she'd understood music in a way that transcended technical training. "My mother wrote a song," Aria said. "I'll sing that." "Good," Jackson said. "Original material is always a strong choice. Listen, I meant what I said out there. I'm taking responsibility for getting you this audition, which means I'm invested in seeing you succeed. But I also need you to be realistic. Vivian Frost doesn't give second chances, and she doesn't tolerate mediocrity. You're going to need to be perfect in that room, or this ends before it begins." "I understand," Aria said, and she did. She'd been living without second chances for 6 months. She knew exactly how high the stakes were. The 30 minutes passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Aria found a bathroom and did her best to clean up, splashing water on her face and attempting to comb her fingers through her tangled hair. The girl who stared back at her from the mirror looked older than 8, her eyes carrying a weariness that no child should have to know. But beneath that weariness there was something else, a spark of determination, of defiance against a world that had taken so much and given back so little. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "Mama always said you had her voice. Show them she was right." When she emerged from the bathroom, Oliver was waiting with an expression of profound irritation. "Conference room B," he said curtly. "They're waiting for you." The walk down the hallway felt longer than it should have been, each step bringing Aria closer to a moment that would define everything that came after. She thought about Samuel, probably awake by now and looking around with those wide, trusting eyes that believed his sister could solve any problem. She thought about her parents, their faces growing hazier in her memory with each passing month. She thought about the cold nights behind the bus station and the constant gnawing hunger and the fear that had become her constant companion. All of it had led to this moment. All of it had to mean something. Oliver pushed open the conference room door and Aria stepped inside. The room was smaller than she'd expected, more intimate. A long table dominated the center, behind which sat 3 people. Vivienne Frost occupied the middle position, her posture rigidly perfect, her expression unreadable. To her left sat an older Asian man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, Marcus Chen, Aria remembered from the posters. And to Vivienne's right sat Jackson, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "Miss Linden," Vivienne said formally, "you have 5 minutes to demonstrate why we should consider bending numerous rules and regulations to allow you to compete in the Rising Voice Nationals. I suggest you make them count." Aria stood in the center of the room, suddenly aware of how small she was, how young, how utterly out of place in this world of professionals and protocols. But then she thought about what Jackson had said, that she had real talent, the kind they'd created this show to find. She thought about her mother's voice teaching her harmonies, her father's encouragement, Samuel's complete faith that his big sister would keep them safe. She opened her mouth and began to sing. The song started softly, almost tentatively, like the first light of dawn breaking over a dark landscape. It was her mother's lullaby, the one Victoria had written about hope and love, and the fierce determination to protect the things that mattered most. Aria had sung it 1,000 times to Samuel, but never like this. Never with the full power of her voice, never with the understanding of what the words truly meant. Her voice grew stronger with each line, filling the small conference room with a sound that was both technically precise and emotionally raw. She sang about loss and loneliness, about fear and desperation, but also about the stubborn refusal to give up, the insistence that tomorrow could be better than today if you were brave enough to fight for it. She sang with her mother's technique and her own hard-won experience of survival, and somehow the combination created something that transcended both. When the final note faded into silence, Aria realized her eyes were wet with tears. She hadn't known she was crying. The three judges sat motionless, and for a terrible moment Aria thought she had failed, that whatever she'd put into that performance hadn't been enough. Then Marcus Chen began to clap, slow and steady. Jackson joined him, and finally, reluctantly, Vivienne brought her hands together in perfunctory applause. "Well," Vivienne said, and her voice carried none of its earlier sharpness. "That was unexpected." Marcus Chen leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table before him, his expression thoughtful. "Where did you learn to sing like that, Aria? Did you have formal training?" "My mother taught me," Aria said, her voice still shaky from the emotion of the performance. "She used to be a singer before she had me. She taught me everything, breathing, pitch, how to make the words matter. She said music wasn't just about hitting the right notes, it was about making people feel something true." "Your mother was correct," Marcus said gently. "What you just demonstrated was technically proficient, but more importantly, it was authentic. That kind of emotional honesty is rare, especially in someone so young. I'm very sorry for your loss." The kindness in his voice threatened to undo Aria completely. She had learned to handle hostility and indifference, but genuine compassion was almost harder to bear. It reminded her of everything she'd lost, all the warmth and safety that had been ripped away in a single terrible moment on a rain-slicked highway. "Thank you," she managed, blinking back fresh tears. Vivienne tapped one perfectly manicured finger against the table, her expression still carefully neutral. "The technical aspects are indeed solid. Your pitch is excellent, your control is remarkable for your age, and you clearly understand dynamics and emotional phrasing. However, talent alone doesn't address the significant logistical and ethical concerns surrounding your participation in this competition." "Vivienne," Jackson began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "Let me finish," she said sharply. "Miss Linden, you are 8 years old, homeless, and responsible for an infant. Even if we were to allow you to compete, and I emphasize the word if, what happens when you need to rehearse, when you need to travel for the show? When you need adult supervision and support that goes far beyond what a competition can provide? We are not a social services agency. We are not equipped to handle a situation like yours." "I don't need you to handle my situation," Aria said, her voice gaining strength. "I just need a chance to compete. I can take care of Samuel. I've been doing it this long, haven't I? We're still here. We're still alive. All I'm asking is for the same chance everyone else gets, to audition, to perform, to maybe win. The rest is my responsibility." "The rest is not your responsibility," Vivienne countered. "You're a child. Children should not have to worry about survival. They should not have to raise infants or live on the streets or carry the weight of the world on their shoulders." "But I do," Aria said simply. "Whether I should or not doesn't change what is. And what is, right now, is that I have a voice that you just admitted was good enough. So the only question is whether you're going to let me use it." Silence fell over the room, thick with tension and unspoken concerns. Jackson watched Vivienne carefully, while Marcus looked between Aria and his fellow judges with an expression of deep sympathy. Finally, Vivienne let out a long breath and pinched the bridge of her nose as if fighting off a headache. "Marcus, your thoughts?" she asked. Marcus smiled sadly at Aria. I think she deserves a chance. Yes, the situation is complicated, and yes, there are significant concerns that need to be addressed. But that voice, that gift, is real. If we turn her away simply because her circumstances are difficult, what does that say about us? About what we claim this competition represents. It says we have standards and protocols that exist for good reason, Vivienne said, but her tone lacked conviction. She turned to Jackson. And you? You're already on record as supporting her audition, but I want to hear you acknowledge the full scope of what you're advocating for. Jackson met Vivienne's gaze steadily. I'm advocating for giving a talented kid a shot at something better than the hand she's been dealt. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, there are risks. But Marcus is right. If we turn away someone this talented because she doesn't fit neatly into our expected categories, then what's the point of any of this? We're supposed to be finding voices that deserve to be heard. Well, we just heard one. Vivienne looked at Aria for a long moment, her ice-blue eyes searching for something, doubt, perhaps, or weakness, or any sign that this was just a performance, a manipulation designed to prey on their sympathy. But Aria met her gaze without flinching, letting Vivienne see everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the desperate hope, and beneath it all, the absolute determination to keep fighting no matter what. One condition, Vivienne finally said. The preliminary round happens tonight during the live audition show. You'll perform first, before the television audience, before the other contestants, before anyone has a chance to warm up the crowd. No special treatment, no adjustments for your circumstances. You'll have the same time limit, the same technical requirements, the same standards as every other auditioner. If you succeed, we'll discuss what comes next. If you fail, I understand, Aria interrupted. If I fail, it's over. No, Vivienne corrected. If you fail, I personally ensure you and your brother are connected with proper social services and placed in a stable home. This ends tonight, one way or another. Either you demonstrate that you belong in this competition, or you accept that you belong somewhere safer than the streets. Those are your options. It wasn't really a choice, and they both knew it. Aria could refuse, could walk out of this room and disappear back into the anonymous streets of Briar Glen. But then what? More cold nights, more hunger, more fear that every police officer or social worker might be the one who finally separated her from Samuel. Or she could take this chance, this single shot at changing everything, knowing that failure meant losing control of her own fate. I accept, Aria said. I'll perform tonight. Then we're done here, Vivienne said, standing abruptly. Oliver will get you the paperwork. The show starts at 7. Be ready at 6:30 for sound check. Don't be late and don't make me regret this decision. She swept out of the room without another word, leaving Marcus and Jackson to exchange glances that communicated an entire conversation without words. Marcus followed Vivienne, pausing only to give Aria's shoulder a gentle squeeze as he passed. You're braver than you know, he said quietly. Trust in that. Then he was gone, and it was just Aria and Jackson in the conference room. Jackson came around the table and crouched down so he was at eye level with her, his expression serious but not unkind. That wasn't easy for Vivienne, he said. She's not heartless despite appearances. She's just seen a lot of talented people destroyed by this industry, and she's protective of the young ones especially. What she just agreed to goes against every instinct she has about keeping vulnerable people safe. I know, Aria said, but I'm not fragile. I'm stronger than I look. I believe you, Jackson said, but strong doesn't mean invincible. Tonight is going to be hard. You'll be going out there first, which means the audience will be cold, unprepared. They might not respond the way you hope. They might not be kind. Can you handle that? Aria thought about the people who stepped over her and Samuel on the street, who averted their eyes from their cardboard shelter, who walked past as if they were invisible. She thought about the store owners who chased her away when she tried to ask for day-old bread, the shelter workers who said they were full when clearly they weren't. She had lived with unkindness for 6 months. A few more hours of it wouldn't break her. "I can handle it," she said. "Okay," Jackson said, standing and offering his hand. "Then let's go get your brother and figure out the next steps. You've got about 7 hours until showtime. I suggest you use them wisely. Rest, prepare, and try not to think too much about what's riding on this." Aria took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "Everything's riding on this. How am I supposed to not think about that?" "Good point," Jackson said with a slight smile. "Then think about it. But don't let it paralyze you. You've survived this long by being resilient and resourceful. Tonight, you just need to be those things while also being the best singer you can be." They walked together through the hallways of the performance hall, past contestants rehearsing in practice rooms, past staff members rushing to prepare for the evening's live show, past all the machinery of a world Aria had never imagined being part of. When they reached the wardrobe room, Mara had Samuel fed, changed and happily playing with a set of soft blocks that she'd apparently procured from somewhere. "There's my girl," Mara said warmly as Aria entered. "Your brother is an absolute angel. Ate his lunch like a champion and hasn't cried once. You're doing something right with him, sweetie." The praise made Aria's throat tight. When was the last time someone had told her she was doing something right? When was the last time anyone had acknowledged that keeping Samuel alive and relatively happy for 6 months while living on the streets was actually an achievement worth recognizing? "Thank you," Aria said, scooping Samuel up and holding him close. He babbled happily and patted her cheeks with his chubby hands, and she buried her face in his neck, breathing in the clean smell of him. Mara must have given him a wash. "Thank you for taking care of him." "Oh, honey, it was my pleasure," Mara said. She hesitated, then added carefully, "I heard you're performing tonight, in the live show." "First slot," Aria confirmed. "That's a tough position," Mara said, "but I have a feeling you're going to be just fine. However, and please don't take this the wrong way, you might want to freshen up a bit before then. I've got some clothes in the back that were donated for emergencies. Nothing fancy, but clean and in your size if you're interested. And there's a shower in the employee facilities if you want to use it." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Aria felt tears prick her eyes again. "I couldn't." "You absolutely could," Mara said firmly. "Consider it part of the show's hospitality. We want all our performers looking their best after all. And sweetie, I say this with love. You could use a bit of freshening up. Come on, let's get you sorted." The next hour passed in a blur of unexpected kindness. Mara found Aria a simple but clean outfit, jeans that actually fit, a soft blue sweater that was warm without being bulky, even socks without holes. The shower was the first hot water Aria had felt in months, and she stood under the spray far longer than was probably appropriate, letting the heat seep into her bones and wash away layers of dirt and fear. When she emerged, Mara had prepared more food, sandwiches and fruit and milk that tasted like luxury after weeks of stale crackers and whatever she could scavenge. Samuel ate enthusiastically, clearly thriving under Mara's care, and Aria felt a pang of guilt that she couldn't provide for him the way this stranger could after just a few hours. "Don't do that," Mara said gently, somehow reading Aria's thoughts in her expression. "Don't compare yourself to what I can do with resources and stability behind me. You've kept that baby alive and loved with absolutely nothing, which makes you something close to a miracle worker in my book. I'm just adding a bit of support to what you've already built." "Why are you being so nice to us?" Aria asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "You don't know us. We're nobody." Mara's expression softened. "Oh, sweetie, You're not nobody. You're a scared little girl doing her best in an impossible situation, and that baby there is lucky to have someone who loves him the way you clearly do. As for why I'm helping, let's just say I know what it's like to have the world pull the rug out from under you. Someone helped me when I needed it most. I'm just passing that forward." She didn't elaborate, and Aria didn't push. Some stories were too painful to tell to strangers, no matter how kind those strangers might be. She understood that better than most. The hours until showtime crawled by with agonizing slowness. Aria tried to rest, but sleep was impossible with her nerves humming like live wires. She went over the lyrics to her mother's song again and again, terrified she might forget them under the pressure of the moment. She practiced her breathing, her posture, all the technical details her mother had drilled into her during those precious years when the world still made sense. Samuel grew fussy as the afternoon wore on, picking up on Aria's anxiety and responding with his own distress. She walked him through the backstage corridors, humming softly to calm them both, and tried not to think about what would happen if she failed tonight. Tried not to imagine social workers taking Samuel away, placing them in separate homes, destroying the last connection she had to her family. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to him, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. "Tonight, we sing, and then everything changes. You'll see." At 6 o'clock, Oliver found them in the wardrobe room and announced with barely concealed irritation that it was time for sound check. The performance hall had transformed in the hours since morning. Lights blazed from every angle, cameras were positioned throughout the space, and crew members rushed about making final adjustments. The stage itself was enormous, far bigger than Aria had imagined, with a single microphone stand positioned in the center, like an island in a vast ocean. "You'll come on from stage left," a technician explained, adjusting Aria's microphone pack. "Wait for your cue. Walk to the center, sing your piece, keep it under 3 minutes. When you're done, wait for the judge's comments. Then exit stage right. Simple enough?" Nothing about it felt simple, but Aria nodded anyway. The sound check itself was surreal. The empty hall amplified every sound, her footsteps crossing the stage, the rustle of the microphone being adjusted, her own breathing echoing back at her from the speakers. She sang a few bars of her song, letting the technicians adjust levels, and tried not to think about how different it would feel when thousands of eyes were watching. "Good," the sound engineer called out. "You're all set. Volume is perfect. Try to maintain that same energy level during the actual performance. Try to maintain it, as if maintaining anything would be possible once the adrenaline hit. Once the fear took over, once the entire trajectory of her and Samuel's lives hung on 3 minutes of sound." "You're going to do great," Mara said, appearing at Aria's side with Samuel in her arms. "I'll be right in the wings with this little one, watching the whole time. You're not alone in this, okay?" "Okay," Aria whispered, though she felt profoundly alone standing on that enormous stage. Jackson appeared as well, making his way up from the judges' table to where Aria stood frozen at the microphone. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," Aria admitted. "Good," Jackson said. "Fear means you care about the outcome. Just remember, you've already survived things that would break most adults. A few minutes on stage? That's nothing compared to what you've already conquered. Trust in your voice, trust in your mother's training, and most importantly, trust in yourself." He squeezed her shoulder gently, then made his way back to his position. The crew continued their preparations, and gradually the hall began to fill with audience members, hundreds of them, streaming in through the main doors, finding their seats, chattering with excitement about the show they were about to witness. Aria retreated to the wings, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Mara stood beside her, still holding Samuel, and offered silent support with her presence. On stage, A host Aria didn't recognize was warming up the crowd, making jokes, explaining the format, building the energy. And then, suddenly, it was time. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced, his voice booming through the sound system, "welcome to the Rising Voice Nationals. Tonight we begin our search for America's next great voice, and we're starting with a very special audition. Please welcome to the stage our first performer of the evening, 8-year-old Aria Linden." The applause that greeted the announcement was polite but confused. Aria could hear the murmurs rippling through the audience as she stepped onto the stage. Whispers about her age, her appearance, the unusual circumstances that had somehow landed her in the opening slot of a nationally broadcast competition. The stage lights were blinding, far brighter than they'd been during soundcheck, and for a moment Aria couldn't see anything beyond the first few rows of seats. She walked to the microphone stand, her legs feeling disconnected from her body, moving on autopilot while her mind spun in 1,000 directions at once. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. 3 minutes to prove she deserved to be here. To prove that talent mattered more than circumstances, to prove that her mother's voice lived on in her throat and her heart. The audience settled into expectant silence. From her position at the judges' table, Vivienne Frost sat with perfect posture, her expression carefully neutral. Marcus Chen offered an encouraging smile. Jackson leaned forward slightly, his attention completely focused on Aria. Behind them, cameras captured every angle, broadcasting this moment to who knew how many viewers across the country. Aria opened her mouth to begin, but before she could produce a single note, a voice rang out from somewhere in the middle of the audience. "Is this a joke? She's just a kid." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Aria felt her carefully constructed courage begin to crumble. She gripped the microphone stand tighter, her knuckles white with tension. Another voice joined in, this one from the left side of the hall. "Where are her parents? This is supposed to be a professional competition." More laughter, louder this time, less nervous, more derisive. Aria saw people in the audience turning to their neighbors, having conversations about her as if she weren't standing right there, as if she couldn't hear every dismissive word. From the wings, she could hear Samuel beginning to cry, his wails cutting through the chaos like a knife. The sound pulled at something primal in Aria's chest. Her brother needed her, and she was standing here on this stage being mocked by strangers while he suffered. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to go to him, to abandon this foolish dream and return to the only thing that mattered, keeping Samuel safe. Then something flew through the air, glinting in the stage lights. A plastic water bottle landed near the microphone stand with a hollow thud, and Aria flinched backward, her heart hammering against her ribs. The laughter grew louder, crueler. Someone shouted something she couldn't quite make out, but the contempt in the tone was unmistakable. This was a mistake. This whole thing was a terrible mistake. She didn't belong here. She was just a homeless kid with delusions of grandeur, thinking she could stand on a stage and change her life through sheer force of will. The audience could see through her, could see what she really was. Desperate, pathetic, utterly out of her depth. Enough! The single word cracked through the space like thunder, amplified by Jackson Vale's microphone as he stood abruptly from the judges' table. The laughter died instantly. Even Samuel's crying seemed to quiet in the sudden stillness. Jackson's expression was furious in a way Aria hadn't seen before, his usual easy demeanor replaced by something harder and more uncompromising. He surveyed the audience with an intensity that made people shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I don't know what you all think you paid admission to see tonight," Jackson said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "But I can tell you what you didn't pay for, the right to mock a child. This young woman walked onto this stage with more courage than most of us will demonstrate in our entire lives, and you respond by throwing things at her, by laughing at her circumstances?" He paused, letting his words sink in. The audience sat in chastened silence. "If you can't show compassion," Jackson continued, his tone softening slightly but losing none of its conviction, "then at least show respect. Respect for the fact that she's here, respect for what it took to get here, and respect for the simple human decency of letting someone have their moment before you decide whether they deserve it or not." He sat back down, but his message hung in the air, shifting something fundamental in the room's energy. The hostility didn't disappear entirely, but it transformed into something more uncertain, more willing to be proven wrong. Vivienne Frost's microphone clicked on. "Miss Linden," she said, and her voice was gentler than Aria had heard it all day. "Whenever you're ready." Aria looked out at the audience, hundreds of faces now watching her with a mixture of curiosity, embarrassment, and cautious interest. She thought about her mother's voice teaching her harmonies in their kitchen, warm afternoons spent learning how to breathe properly, how to support each note from her diaphragm, how to make the lyrics matter. She thought about her father's hands-on piano keys, the way he'd explained that music was just organized emotion, that the best performers were the ones who weren't afraid to feel deeply and share those feelings honestly. She thought about Samuel, quiet now in Mara's arms, but still depending on her, still trusting that his big sister would somehow make everything okay. And she began to sing. The first notes came out shaky, uncertainty making her voice waver on the opening line of her mother's lullaby. But as she moved into the second phrase, something inside her settled. This wasn't about the audience or the judges or the cameras capturing every moment. This was about the song itself, about the words her mother had written and the love they contained, about the promise Aria had made to keep Samuel safe no matter what it cost. Her voice strengthened, filling the hall with a sound that was both technically precise and emotionally raw. She sang about darkness and light, about fear and hope, about the fierce determination to protect the things that mattered most, even when the whole world felt like it was conspiring against you. The melody her mother had composed was deceptively simple, but Aria had lived enough in the past 6 months to understand its deeper meaning, that sometimes the only thing separating survival from surrender was the stubborn refusal to give up. As she sang, Aria could feel the audience's energy shifting. The skepticism and derision melted away, replaced by something that felt like recognition. These people might not have lived on the streets or lost their parents or been responsible for an infant at age 8, but they understood loss. They understood struggle. They understood what it meant to hold on to hope when everything else had been stripped away. The song built to its climax, and Aria let her voice soar, pouring everything she had into the final verse. She sang for her mother and father, for the life they'd built and lost. She sang for Samuel, for the future she was desperate to give him. She sang for every cold night and hungry day, for every moment of fear and doubt and exhaustion. She sang because singing was the only thing she'd ever been truly good at, the only gift her parents had been able to leave her, and she refused to let their legacy die in silence. When the final note faded, the hall was absolutely silent. Aria stood at the microphone, breathing hard, tears streaming down her face without her even realizing when they'd started. For one terrible moment, she thought she'd failed, that despite everything, the performance hadn't been enough. Then the applause began. It started as a single person clapping somewhere in the back, then spread like wildfire through the audience. People rose to their feet, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds, until the entire hall was standing and applauding with a fervor that made the stage vibrate beneath Aria's feet. The sound was overwhelming, a physical force that seemed to wash over her in waves. At the judges' table, Marcus Chen was openly crying, making no attempt to hide the tears running down his face. Jackson had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with emotion. And Vivienne Frost, strict, uncompromising Vivienne Frost, was standing with the rest of the audience, her hands coming together in steady applause, her ice blue eyes bright with something that looked suspiciously like tears she refused to let fall. The standing ovation continued for what felt like an eternity, and Aria stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed and exhausted, and barely able to process what was happening. The host had to quiet the audience 3 times before they finally settled enough for the judges to give their comments. Marcus spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "Aria, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've heard thousands of voices, seen hundreds of performances, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've been moved the way I was just now. What you have is not just talent. It's a gift. A genuine, rare gift that deserves to be nurtured and celebrated. Thank you for sharing it with us tonight." Jackson was next, and he had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. "I knew you could sing. I heard it this morning when you were just trying to calm your brother. But what you just did up there, that was something else entirely. That was truth. That was art. That was everything music is supposed to be at its best. Whatever happens going forward, don't ever lose that honesty. Don't ever let anyone tell you to be something other than exactly what you are." Finally, all eyes turned to Vivienne. She stood slowly, her posture still perfect despite the emotion clearly warring beneath her composed exterior. She looked at Aria for a long moment before speaking, and when she did, her voice carried across the silent hall. "I owe you an apology," Vivienne said, and the admission seemed to cost her something significant. "When you walked into my competition today, I saw your circumstances before I saw you. I saw problems and complications and liability issues. I saw everything except the one thing that actually mattered, that you are a genuinely gifted artist." She paused, and something that might have been a smile flickered at the corners of her mouth. "You reminded me tonight what honesty in music sounds like, what bravery looks like. What it means to have something so important to say that you'll say it despite impossible odds and hostile audiences and every logical reason to give up. That kind of artistic integrity is rare at any age. In someone your age, it's extraordinary." Vivienne's expression turned serious again. "I meant what I said earlier. Your circumstances remain deeply concerning, and they need to be addressed regardless of your talent. But as far as this competition goes, as far as your place on this stage," she looked at Marcus and Jackson, then back to Aria, "it's unanimous. Welcome to the Rising Voice Nationals, Aria Linden. You're going straight to the finals." The audience erupted again, and this time the sound was pure celebration, no skepticism or mockery anywhere in sight. Aria felt her knees go weak with relief, with exhaustion, with the sudden release of tension that had been building for hours, for days, for the entire 6 months since her world had fallen apart. She made it off stage somehow, her legs carrying her through muscle memory alone. The moment she reached the wings, Mara was there with Samuel, and Aria gathered her brother into her arms and held him so tightly he squeaked in protest. She buried her face in his neck and let the tears come properly now, great heaving sobs of relief and joy, and lingering fear because this wasn't over. Not really. It was just beginning. "You did it," Mara whispered, wrapping her arms around both children and holding them close. "Oh, honey, you really did it." Jackson appeared moments later, slightly out of breath from hurrying backstage. "That was incredible," he said. "Aria, I don't even have words for what that was." "Thank you," Aria managed through her tears. "Thank you for standing up for me. When they were laughing when someone threw that bottle, I was going to run. I was going to leave and never come back." "I know," Jackson said gently. "But you didn't. You stayed and you sang, and you showed them all who you really are. That takes more courage than most people have." Vivienne Frost made her way backstage as well, moving with her characteristic precision despite the chaos of the post-performance moment. She stopped a few feet away from Aria, maintaining a certain professional distance even now. "Miss Linden," she said formally, "I meant every word I said out there. You have genuine talent that deserves support and cultivation. However, I also meant what I said about your circumstances. This competition runs for 6 more weeks, with performances every Friday night. That's 6 weeks of rehearsals, media commitments, and the intense pressure of live competition. I need to know you can handle that, and more importantly, I need to know that your brother will be properly cared for throughout the process." "I can handle it," Aria said quickly. "You shouldn't have to handle it alone," Vivienne interrupted, "which is why I've already spoken with our legal team about establishing a temporary guardianship arrangement. Mr. Vale has agreed to serve as your official guardian for the duration of the competition, with Ms. Lee providing childcare support for Samuel. This will give you the stability you need to compete while ensuring your brother's needs are met." Aria looked at Jackson in shock. "You'd really do that? Take legal responsibility for us?" "I already offered this morning," Jackson reminded her. "I don't make offers I'm not prepared to follow through on. If you're comfortable with the arrangement, I'm all in. You need support, and I'm in a position to provide it. It's that simple." "Nothing about this is simple," Vivienne said dryly. "But it's the best solution we have given the circumstances. Miss Linden, do you accept these terms?" Aria looked down at Samuel, who had calmed completely and was now playing with a button on her borrowed sweater, oblivious to the life-changing conversation happening around him. She thought about what this meant, accepting help from strangers, placing her and Samuel's immediate future in the hands of people she'd met only hours ago, trusting that their kindness would last beyond the initial impulse. But what choice did she really have? The alternative was returning to the streets, to the cold and hunger and constant fear. At least this way she had a chance. They both had a chance. "I accept," Aria said. "And thank you, all of you. I don't know how to, I can't even—" Her voice broke, the enormity of everything finally overwhelming her ability to maintain composure. "You don't have to say anything," Mara said warmly, still holding both children close. "You just have to let us help." "Can you do that?" Aria nodded, not trusting her voice anymore. Samuel chose that moment to reach for her face, patting her wet cheeks with his small hands, and she couldn't help but laugh through her tears. He'd been through so much in his short life, yet he still smiled, still trusted, still believed his big sister would make everything okay. "We're safe now," Aria whispered to him, echoing the promise she'd made that morning behind the bus station. But this time the words felt true in a way they hadn't before. This time there were people standing beside them, ready to help carry the weight she'd been bearing, alone for so long. "We're really safe." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of paperwork and practical arrangements. Jackson's lawyer was contacted and immediately began drawing up temporary guardianship documents. Mara made calls to arrange proper accommodation. Apparently she had a spare room in her house that she insisted was perfect for Aria and Samuel until something more permanent could be arranged. Vivienne coordinated with the show's production team to ensure Aria's schedule would be manageable and that appropriate childcare would always be available during rehearsals and performances. It was overwhelming and exhausting, and more kindness than Aria had experienced in the entire 6 months since her parents' death. People she'd known for less than a day were restructuring their lives to accommodate her and Samuel, offering support without expecting anything in return, except that she continued to sing, continued to share the gift her mother had given her. By the time they left the performance hall that night, Aria was so tired she could barely walk. Mara drove them to her house, a modest but warm place in a quiet neighborhood that felt impossibly luxurious after months of sleeping on cardboard. The spare room had a real bed with clean sheets, and there was a crib set up for Samuel, and the bathroom had hot water that Aria could use whenever she wanted. "Get some rest," Mara said gently, showing them around. "Tomorrow we'll figure out everything else. Clothes, supplies, whatever you need. But tonight, just sleep. You're safe here. Both of you." Aria put Samuel down in the crib, watching as he immediately drifted off, exhausted by the day's events. Then she climbed into the bed, her first real bed in half a year, and pulled the clean blanket up to her chin. The mattress was soft, the pillow was comfortable, and the room was warm without being stifling. She should have fallen asleep immediately. Her body was exhausted beyond measure, her emotions wrung out from the day's roller coaster of fear and triumph and overwhelming change. But instead she lay awake in the darkness, listening to Samuel's gentle breathing and trying to process everything that had happened. 12 hours ago, she'd been sleeping behind a bus station, cold and hungry and terrified of what the future held. Now she was in a safe house with people committed to helping her, with a spot in a national competition, with a real chance at the life she'd been dreaming of for Samuel. It felt surreal, like a fantasy she'd wake from to find herself back in that alley, back in the cold, back in the endless struggle just to survive one more day. But the warmth of the blanket was real. The softness of the mattress was real. Samuel's sleeping presence in the crib beside her was real. This wasn't a dream. This was actually happening. "We did it, Mama," Aria whispered into the darkness, her voice barely audible. "I sang your song, and people heard it. I think you would have been proud." No answer came, of course. Her mother was gone, had been gone for a year, existed now only in memories that grew hazier with each passing month. But in that moment, lying in the warm darkness of Mara's spare room, Aria could almost feel her mother's presence. In the melody she'd sung, in the courage she'd found to stand on that stage, in the love that had driven her to fight so hard for Samuel's future. "Thank you," Aria whispered, not sure if she was talking to her mother or to Jackson or to Mara or to whatever force in the universe had conspired to give her this chance. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be rehearsals and interviews and all the complications of navigating a world she didn't fully understand. There would be more performances, more pressure, more moments where everything hung in the balance. But tomorrow was tomorrow. Tonight she was warm and safe and fed, and Samuel was sleeping peacefully in a real crib. And for the first time in 6 months, the future felt like something other than an endless series of obstacles to overcome. Tonight, she could rest. Aria closed her eyes and let herself drift, her mother's lullaby playing softly in her mind, carrying her gently into sleep. In the crib beside her, Samuel stirred slightly, making the small, contented sounds of a baby who felt safe and loved. And in that quiet room, in that moment of peace, they were finally home. The journey wasn't over, in many ways. It was just beginning. There would be finals to compete in, decisions to make, a life to rebuild from fragments and loss and hard-won hope. But they would face it together, Aria and Samuel, with people beside them who cared, who believed in them, who were willing to help carry the burden that had grown too heavy for one 8-year-old girl to bear alone. They had been homeless, hopeless, invisible to a world too busy to notice their suffering. But tonight, thousands of people had seen them, had heard Aria's voice and recognized something true and valuable in it, had applauded not just her talent but her courage, her determination, her refusal to surrender even when surrender would have been so much easier. Tomorrow, when the sun rose on their first real day of this new life, they would wake up safe and warm. They would have breakfast at a table instead of searching for scraps. They would have people who cared about them, people who wanted to help them succeed. And Aria would continue to sing, not just for survival anymore, but because singing was her gift, her legacy, her mother's voice living on through her own. She had promised Samuel they would be safe, and for the first time since making that promise, she believed it might actually come true. Not because of magic or miracles, but because of music. Because she had found the courage to use her voice, to tell her truth, to let the world hear the song her mother had written about hope and love and the unbreakable bonds that held families together, even when everything else fell apart. As sleep finally claimed her, Aria smiled. Tomorrow would come with all its challenges and uncertainties. But tonight, in this moment, they had everything that truly mattered: safety, warmth, and the beginning of a future that looked nothing like the past 6 months, and everything like the home they'd lost. They were going to be okay. Both of them. Together. And that, Aria thought as consciousness faded into dreams of her mother's smile and her father's music and Samuel's laughter, was more than enough. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. What moment resonated with you most? And if you enjoyed this journey with Aria and Samuel, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that courage and talent can light the way even through the darkest times. Your support helps us continue bringing these stories to life. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.